Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother, asarimhotep, with the Madhu Mandela Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture and the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. Today is Friday, April the 30th, 2021, and we are blessed to have a very, very special guest with us this morning. Brother James Morgan, who's a historian, an archivist, a genealogist, and author. We're going to talk about his book, The Lost Empire, Black Freemasonry in the Old West, 1867 to 1906. And 1906 is a very good year for those who know and understand. But all of that and more when we return in just a moment. Yes, and we are back. And I forgot to do my morning ritual. I got me some sage and citrus incense. So you know we can't do the show without invoking some ancestral spirits through the incense and the candles. I ain't burning the SU candle today. You can see it at the top of the shelf up there. So let me just put this here and get my mind right. And how are y'all doing this morning out there in YouTube land and Facebook land and every other land who's watching? I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us this morning and or afternoon if you're on the other side of the world. And today we have, as mentioned before, a very special guest, Brother James Morgan, and we're going to learn more about him in just a moment. And before then, of course, I just have a few announcements. If you have not joined our Patreon page, you can join at patreon.com/asarimhotep. There are different tiers in which you can join, and you are by joining, you are helping to support the channel and to support the upcoming documentary film. And I'll be doing I'll be starting a few of the interviews for the film this summer. So I will be updating those in the Patreon page of what's going on there. So the film Chena Into will be dealing with the relationship between the Bantu speakers of Central, East, and South Africa and ancient Kemet. So it's going to be a very, very powerful film. And, you know, I would love for each and every one of you to be a part of that process. So make sure that you join us and join the Patreon and support this channel financially. And if you, and I don't have a flyer, but we're going to have a very, very special guest, a very powerful sister who out of Jamaica, but who lives in New York, but who's currently in Jamaica, who built the Ifetayo Center out in New York City. And she also studied under Dr. Fukiao. And so we're going to talk about her work and Dr. Fukiao and the great things that she is doing and has done, you know, over the past 30 years or so. So that's going to be on next Friday. So I'll have the flyer for that when we solidify the exact time. So we're just negotiating the time, but it will be next Friday, and all of that good stuff. So shout out to everyone who has made themselves known in the chat. So peace to Sister Tamika and Don L. and Brian Benno Smith, and of course, Big Brother OG Gorilla in the place to be, and all of those of you who are on Facebook on the Harold Johnson page and the asarimhotep page. Thank you all for listening. And so, without further ado, and peace to Non-Swirl Zone in the building. Thank you for joining us. I'm just going to read briefly the bio for our good brother from his website, and then I am going to bring him on. And so our good brother James R. Morgan III, he is a graduate of Howard University in Washington, D.C., where he completed his undergraduate studies in communications and Africana Studies. He is the recipient of the 2019 Dr. Charles H. Wesley Medal of History and the 2020 Phyllis Wheatley Book Award for Nonfiction Biography. James is an active Prince Hall Freemason. As such, he serves as Worshipful Grand Historian and Archivist of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia. He has authored several scholarly writings on African American Freemasonry, fraternalism, and genealogy. He is also an honorary fellow and life member of the Phylaxis Research Center. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but he can correct me. James is an experienced genealogist and a member of the James Dent Walker chapter of the African American Historical and Genealogical Society. He has presented at the 2016 International Black Genealogy Symposium, as well as the 2019 National Conference of AAHGAS. James serves as a member of the advisory board of the Bishop Henry McNeil Turner Project and is the author of the award-winning book, The Lost Empire, Black Freemasonry in the Old West, 1867 to 1906. James was named as one of the first of 3 awardees of inaugural Paul E. Slubby Senior African American Scholarship by the Board of Certification of Genealogists. James is a co-panelist on the both Black Pro Gen Live. Let me say that again. James is a co-panelist on both Black Pro Gen Live and the Prince Hall Think Tank, both of which can be found on YouTube. He is currently employed with the United States Department of State and serves as a curatorial consultant with the African American Civil War Museum in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to learn how to read one of these days. But until then, I want y'all to welcome our guest, Brother James Morgan. How you doing this morning, brother?
Hey, good morning. I am Black in America, sir. And yes, that is an emotional state.
Indeed.
Yes, sir. Two notes about the biography. One is you pronounce Phylaxis perfectly, which a lot of people don't, number one. And number two, I need to make an addendum to the website because as of roughly a month ago, I decided to fire the Department of State from my life. So I no longer employed there. But other than that, I'm happy to be here.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you for the update. But again, it's a blessing to have you here. I've been kind of following you, for the past few years and the work you're doing. And especially on the like history of Black Freemasonry and things of that nature. So I want to get into that. But before I do that, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure.
Born originally, how did you get into the field work that you are into? What piqued your interest? Sure. And those influence life circumstances that led you that way.
Sure, no problem. Let me say this. I'm going to start at the end and then go backwards because I know I'm going to forget. One thing I need to add to the biography of the website is that I recently was accepted to the School of Graduate Studies at Morgan State University. So yes, I applied to the school in part because bears my name. But so I'm just gonna get that out the way. And I'm gonna be pursuing a master's degree in African American history there. Now to go back to the beginning, I am originally born and raised in Essex County, New Jersey, the Newark, metropolitan area. I am the son. I'm the oldest of two. I have a younger brother, Wade, who lives out in Los Angeles, California. Um, I'm the son of two very wonderful Black people. My mother, Deborah, her ancestry goes back to southeastern Alabama. My father, James Jr., his ancestry goes back to Southern Virginia and North Carolina. And I have to get that out the way because, as we know, as Africans, we always make sure we acknowledge our ancestors in all that we do. And so I want to make sure I acknowledge those bloodlines which produced me before I even talk about myself. Going forward from there, a regular kid, had an interest in reading, poetry, history growing up. I was involved and still am involved to some degree in the STEP, which is Striving Together Equals Progress Rites of Passage program, which is an African-centered organization based in Newark, New Jersey. I started doing that when I was about 12, all the way through high school, basically. And that kind of set me on a path of exploration of the history of African people, just as did my mother when my parents broke up when I was about 4 or 5. My mother going back to school, and so I remember growing up with my mother having to do homework and whatnot, and she definitely took classes in African American history, taking us to lectures. And I've celebrated Kwanzaa just about all my life, so I think every year when Kwanzaa comes around, that debate comes up about the importance of it and is it relevant and all this type of stuff. Kwanzaa is something that I always go back to as being something that kind of rooted me in it being okay to be African, right? And so regardless of how people feel about the holiday or the politics behind that, I think that we have to bring rituals into our life and culture into our lives, into the lives of our children, so that they know it's okay to be African. And so with that being said, I matriculated through school, graduated from Marist High School, which ceased to exist as of last June, but it was a Catholic school. And I've always had this dilemma as a child of getting the education that I learned in school versus the education I was learning culturally from my home, from my relatives or what have you. And I saw that conflict. And so the older I got, by the time I was 17, I was just sick and tired of the conflict. And so I was very really, actually, by the time I was 14, I was sick and tired of it. And so I had determined that I wanted to attend a historically Black college. Howard University was at the top of that list. And by the grace of God, I was able to be accepted and attended there. I had the honor and pleasure while I was there of being a student of Dr. Greg Carr, later on Dr. Mario Beatty, Dr. Valethia Watkins, Dr. Dana Williams. And at one point in time, I even got to serve as a teaching and research assistant for Dr. Carr my junior and senior years of college, which anybody who knows Dr. Carr knows that, I mean, you get paid to work with Dr. Carr. I mean, that was, a real joy. In 2010, in 2009, 2010, roughly, I decided to seek membership in Prince Hall Freemasonry. I'm sure we'll get into that. During that same time period, really literally after a week after I completed that process, I had the trip of a lifetime to go to Kemet or Egypt as it's called today, with Dr. Carr, Dr. Beatty, and I completed a study abroad there. Also, as a teaching assistant, was assistant teaching some classes as well while I was there. I've been to Africa a second time, which happened in November of 2017 when I decided to travel to Nigeria, which was largely due to the fact of my own genealogical journey and finding out that a lot of my DNA seems to have come from in and around what we call today Nigeria, as does a lot of Africans born in the United States. And so I decided that the next place I wanted to go in Africa was Nigeria. So I've been there twice. I've been working with the African American Civil War Museum for a number of years as a curatorial consultant. And and then I've been very involved in Prince Hall Freemasonry as well, which led to the publication of this book here, which I know we want to talk about today. So, other than that, that's me in a nutshell.
Indeed, indeed. Appreciate that greatly. Now, you mentioned Freemasonry, and you know, in the modern YouTube streets, uh, first thing that comes up in conversation is this the Illuminati, and all of this other kind of stuff. And why would anybody, join that? But what is Freemasonry? And then we'll get into specifically Prince Hall.
Sure.
And it's in his role, in world history, but more specifically in African American history. And why is this important? And then we'll get into the details of the book itself.
Absolutely.
But what is Freemasonry and all of that good stuff?
Sure. The best way I can describe Freemasonry to a non-member is it is a philosophical fraternity. Freemasonry bases its themes on the builder's trade of what we call operative stonemasonry. And so what happened was, at some point in the past, you had the operative stonemasons who were building cathedrals and other monuments of antiquity. Some people want to take it back to the pyramids. They want to take it back to King Solomon's Temple, the Tower of Babel, et cetera, all these different works of architecture. At some point in the past, a group of masons who were operative masons, they actually did the building trade as a career. They began allowing non-stonemasons into the trade. And in doing that, they found that there were ritualistic ceremonies that these operative masons had that were teaching moral lessons about life, as well as about practical education. If anyone who understands architecture engineering understands that in order to be effective in that trade, you have to learn the rules. There's a reason why if you walk in a building and the walls are not at a 90-degree angle, you might want to get out that building quickly, right? And so the brothers at that time understood that, and they understood that could be a moral lesson for how a man should live his life. And so they expanded from that, and over time it became a system of what's known as speculative Freemasonry today. Which, I'm not a stonemason. I don't work in construction at all, even if y'all may hear there's doing some renovations to the building I live in. So if y'all hear that noise, please excuse it. But that is in a nutshell what it is. I mean, there's a lot of taglines. We say that we take good men and make them better. How do we do that? We do that by teaching these kind of universally accepted moral lessons. We are not a religious group, although we do require that a member have a belief in God, whatever that means to that person. We are not a cult. We are not, at least look, if there's any Masons out there taking over the world or anything of that nature, I'm not aware of it. And if they are, I need them to hook a brother up, because the brother got student loans. I definitely just got hit for my HBO subscription this morning. So, we're not any of that stuff. Although a lot of people, like you said, have these conspiracy theories about us. But we really are in general, we are a philosophical fraternity that tries to teach and inspire men to self-improvement.
Let's see. Yeah, we get the same thing with Alpha, Phi Alpha, what I'm saying, all the time as well. But it's interesting that you say that, because in terms of the guild aspect of it, and for anyone who's a serious student of African history and culture knows that this is a common technique even within traditional Africa. And we did a show, I don't know if it was this year or kind of the end of last year, where it was talking about the African superhighway of wisdom. And what African people used to do, and actually still do, is travel along trade routes. And Africans would get initiated into these different guilds, and they would all have their own, saying signs and symbols and lessons based on the guilds itself. And
Right.
so this is exactly what you would see even in ancient Kemet, to where people are thinking it's different religions within the society itself.
Mm-hmm.
They're different guilds, but they all use the tools of the trade, the jargon of the trade, and
Right.
all of these to teach life lessons and to remind people the type of character that they're supposed to have or whatnot, whether they're in the medical field, whether in architecture, whether in there the weaver's craft, what's the name mentions this about the Dogon. Like it is a very kind of, for lack of a better term, Masonic type system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when I get later into the importance and the power of organizations and being a part of a network
Yes, sir.
of individuals who share the same values. But now let's go to specifically Prince Hall Masonry.
Mm-hmm.
And who is Prince Hall, and why is this aspect of Masonry important to know?
Sure. I think that you have already laid down a very important and proper foundation
Mm-hmm.
already by what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Who is Prince Hall? Who was he? What is this movement? Why do we call ourselves Prince Hall Masons? I think that, and what I usually do, which is something that I think makes me somewhat unique, I won't say I'm the only person that does this, but as a Masonic historian, one of the things that I pride myself on is that I start the story of Prince Hall and Prince Hall Freemasonry exactly where you just ended your comment, which is we have to start in Africa. We have to start with the understanding that if you've ever been to West Africa, or if you've never been to West Africa, let me tell you something. West Africa is a place of initiations. It's a place of so-called mysteries. It's a place of understanding the cycle of life. We understand that when you're born, that's a part of life. We understand that when you enter puberty, that's a cycle of life. Marriage is a cycle of life. Elderhood is a cycle of life. Death is a cycle of life. That is something that is a recurring theme in African culture. And so, whilst there may be some who would say that we are practicing, paganism or devil worship or anything of that nature, when we do ancestral veneration, for those people, I would say, when did talking to my grandmother, when did she become the devil? When did my grandfather become demonic? Right? That's not how African people function. And so what you just said is absolutely correct. We understand that for those who've seen Roots, you understand that Kunta Kinte had to go through manhood training, right? There's a book that I would recommend for those who are not familiar with it. You may be familiar with it, good brother. West African Secret Societies, their organizations, officials, and teaching by F.W. Butt Thompson, which talks about this, right? Now, to get to your question, Prince Hall was first and foremost an African man. Whether or not he was born in Africa, born in the Caribbean, as has been published by some, although that's debatable, or born in mainland United States, we do not know for sure where he was born or the exact date, despite there being some false information out there about that. But he was a man of African descent. And he was a man of African descent born in the 1700s. And we have to remember that the 1700s was really a transatlantic period if you were living on this part of the planet. And what I mean by that is you have to understand that you have the crashing together really of three civilizations: African, European, Indigenous, American. Okay. And we all understand the push from European colonialism that propels that, right? Now, Prince Hall, being a man of African descent, was born at a time when they're still bringing our people in slave ships directly from the motherland. Okay. He most likely was born enslaved. There is evidence of that because we do have documentation of his manumission. And so he's born enslaved. He becomes free. He ends up working as a leather dresser. He's an educator as well. Actually educates black children out of his own home. He's a caterer, businessman, and he is able to move in and out of society and actually rub elbows with some very important people in the Boston, Massachusetts area. Um, Tradition states that on March 6, 1775, Prince Hall and 14 other associates of his, who were all Africans as well, that they were initiated, passed, and raised by a man named John Batt in an Irish Military Lodge 441. Since that time, again, this is oral history more so. There has been some more recent research that has led some to state that that this event occurred in 1778, not 1775. Whichever is the case, we do know that Prince Hall obtained the degrees of Freemason from John Batt, and shortly thereafter, he and these brothers they really weren't able to function as Masons, and by function I mean attend lodge meetings with white Masons in the Boston area. Some of these Boston Masons are slave owners, right? And so what they do is they actually form African Lodge. They seek a charter. Initially, Prince Hall thought to seek a charter from France, but he instead seeks one directly from what we call the Premier Grand Lodge of England, or today the United Grand Lodge of England, which was issued to him in September of 1784. However, it was not received by him physically until 1787. As a matter of fact, if you can see right behind me, that bottom frame there is actually a facsimile copy of that charter. Prince Hall receives it physically in Boston in 1787, authorizing and constituting African Lodge number 459, with Prince Hall as master of that lodge. He is able to use his status as the first master of the African Lodge to really have the organization coalesces, and it's not just about Freemasonry. It's also about Prince Hall is very much an abolitionist. He's very much an early. Many would consider him an early Pan-Africanist, an early Black nationalist. Prince Hall actually advocated at one point that basically, if we can't get justice in the United States, then we need we need our people to be sent back home to Africa. Prince Hall also was able. This was a fascinating story that I love telling people. Prince Hall, at one point, there were some brothers who were tricked on what they thought was a fishing vessel. They thought they were getting some work, and it was actually a slaver. They ended up down, I think it was either St. Kitts or St. Bartholomew, or one of those islands. And one of these brothers, by brother, I'm just meaning that these are Black men, ends up on a slave auction block, and he identifies himself as a Mason and a member of African Lodge. There were some Masons there who examine him. They find out that he actually was telling the truth about his Masonic knowledge, and he's able to send back to Boston for his freedom papers and other credentials. Prince Hall actually gets, I believe it was the governor of Boston involved, through some white associates of his, and these men are set free and brought back home to their families. Now, for us as Black folks, most of us, I'm sure, have seen or are familiar with the story of 12 Years a Slave. I mean, the idea of being free and Black and captured and taken into slavery, that sounds like game over. So who was this man? How was he able to do this, right? Part of the reason he's able to do this is because he is organized and organizing his people. To take the story a little further, at one point in time, a man by the name of the Reverend Absalom Jones becomes a member of African Lodge and becomes their chaplain. He, as many should know, was associated with the legendary Bishop Henry McNeil Turner. Bishop Richard Allen, excuse me. Bishop Turner's on my mind right now, but Bishop Richard Allen, who was the founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He and Reverend Absalom Jones were very good friends, as our history tells us. And these brothers in Philadelphia, many of them also were getting Masonic degrees from other sources, from the Caribbean, from Europe. They, through Brother Peter Mantor, write to Prince Hall, and they say that they want a charter, and that the white Masons in Philadelphia are refusing to give it to them because they are fearful that if they give a charter to free Black men in Philadelphia, that they might teach Freemasonry to Black men in Virginia. And they don't want they don't want to encourage the organization among the African community. And so they say, well, we'd rather be under your banner anyway, since you have a charter. We would like to come under you. And so Prince Hall issues them a facsimile copy of his own charter and sets them up as African Lodge 459 of Philadelphia. So you have two. You have an African Lodge of Boston and African Lodge of Philadelphia. Soon after that, there's an African Lodge that pops up in New York. Lodges start popping up in my home state of New Jersey and Ohio, and then before you know it, it becomes this this interstate movement or intercolony movement at that point, but it's soon interstate movement, making Prince Hall Freemasonry one of the, if not the first, interstate organization of Black people, of free Black people in this country. And so that is why we honor him as an organization to this day, and call ourselves Prince Hall Freemasons, or Prince Hall Eastern Stars for the sisters, in honor of our fraternal founding father.
And it's I wanted to briefly get your opinion on the importance of him calling the first lodge the African Lodge, instead of the Negro Lodge or the or simply the Black Lodge.
Certainly.
Like, why is that important for this narrative?
Certainly. So I'm glad you mentioned that you said the word Black Lodge, because you're stirring something up in me.
Okay.
When Prince Hall, I believe it was when the charter arrived, if I'm not mistaken, there was a newspaper, white newspaper, that actually published that the charter, it was either a charter or a parade, I can't remember which one, but in any event, it was some event relating to the lodge, and a white newspaper basically said that St. Black's Lodge, that they got their charter, they had a parade or something like that, and Prince Hall specifically writes back to them and says, we are not St. Black's Lodge, we are the African Lodge. He reaffirms that to this newspaper, we are the African Lodge, we are made up of Africans. And the significance of that, I think, is exactly what I said a second ago. At that time, there is no America. And a lot of us don't realize there was a point in American history that Americans was referring to the indigenous Native Americans. When you said Americans, that's who you were talking about. You're not white. You're not white American. You're Irish. You're British. You're Dutch. You're French. You're Swedish. You're an African. And even in Africans, we had a certain understanding of ethnicity. We're not African American. What's that? I'm Igbo. I'm Yoruba. I'm Hausa, right? Over time, and I think African Lodge is a perfect example of this, we had to have an understanding. And I always tell people, the political unit that we call Black people today didn't start until we all got on a slave ship and we looked around and realized we down here and they up there. Yeah. Or if we want to take it back further, we can go to the Arab slave trade, but we ain't going to get into that right this moment. But when you understand that we began to understand that our common oppression was because of the commonality of our skin color and our origin in Africa, that allows us to then create banners under which we all could come under. So we understand that tribalism then or now gets us nowhere. And so yes, we are the African Lodge, because we're going to have this all-encompassing understanding that we are Africans. African Lodge, the African Meeting House, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the earliest organizations among our people in this country refer themselves as Africans, because at that time, many of them were still somewhat aware of their ethnic, or what they say, tribal origins, or their ethnic origins. And so in order to bring about unity, we identified ourselves as being Africans. And so that's where I believe that's the political milieu that Prince Hall and African Lodge are produced by. And over time, I mean, that's, again, there were about 3 or 4 different African lodges at that point, before some of them started changing their names. But that was very important. And we have to remember too, later on, the Colored Convention movement actually was the movement that began to say, let's take African out of our names. That's when we start getting the colored church and the Negro this and colored that, because Africa begins having this negative connotation. However, and I can't remember if it was the 5th or the 6th conference. I can get you the citation, but there was it was I think the last conference that Bishop Richard Allen was alive for. When they were doing this, they were saying, let's take African out of our names because we want to be more acceptable, right, to the so-called dominant power structure. Bishop Richard Allen said, y'all do what y'all want to do. We the African Methodist Episcopal Church. That's what our name is, and that's how it's going to stay. And and thank God that denomination has maintained that through the years. And I know there's been movements in the past. I don't think anything recent, but about maybe 100 years ago or so, there was another movement to try to get the AME Church and some of these other organizations to take African out their names. And I'm very glad that they did not do that. Prince Hall Freemasonry ended up kind of going for that to some degree, but yeah.
Thank you. Now, the book that you wrote,
yes, sir,
on the Lost Empire. Can you tell us? Just give us a summation of what the book is about, and then can you go into what motivated you to write about it, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So the book is actually, I can sum it up in basically two things. The book, first and foremost, it was written to be a history of what was known as the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas. That Grand Lodge was formed in the year 1867. And there hadn't been really much written on it, but that if you were a Black man and you wanted to be involved in Freemasonry and you lived in the region and at the time that we today refer to as the Wild West, that is the Grand Lodge that you most likely would have been a member of. Secondarily, if that's a word, second, that book, my book is also a biography of the founder of that Grand Lodge and the person who basically spearheaded it during its glory days, a man by the name of Captain William Dominic Matthews, who I'll show you the picture again, show the book again. That's him there on the cover. Captain Matthews was born in the 1820s in Maryland. He traveled to Jamaica and lived there for a couple of years, and then he worked as a grain merchant going up and down the East Coast during the 1850s. He ends up out of work because the state of Maryland passes a law forbidding a Black man from owning a seaworthy vessel. And so, long story short, because of his political connection to Daniel Reed Anthony, who was a sibling of Susan B. Anthony, the women's suffragist, he ends up relocating from Maryland out to Leavenworth, Kansas. He's very active on the Underground Railroad as an agent. He opens up his own hotel and his own boarding house and restaurant called the Waverly House, which also was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And again, this is the Wild West. This is the period of the Kansas the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the 40-40 compromise, and how can a state enter slave or free and all this type of stuff. And so you enter a period known as Bloody Kansas, where some Civil War historians would argue this is the beginning of the Civil War, really and truly, because you have these border skirmishes, and it gets really violent. And William Matthews is a Black man. He's a Freemason, and he was there for all the as we would say today, he was there for all the smoke. He wasn't no punk. I've had some of my friends, we kind of jokingly call him the Suge Knight of Prince Hall Freemasonry, because if there was any if there was any drama, if you wanted hands or you wanted pistol play or whatever, he was with it. he was with it,
man. Indeed.
Yeah.
And before we continue, for all of you just joining, we have Brother James R. Morgan with us, the third, I should say, who's a historian and genealogist and archivist, and we're discussing currently his book, The Lost Empire. And I need y'all to like this video, so I'm gonna give you a second or two to like and thumb up the video. And if you have not already, make sure that you that's right, subscribe to the channel. So when we have important guests such as Brother Morgan and others, that you will be the first to get the notices, and you can set your calendar, stop your wedding, so that you can catch the live and do what you got to do. So make sure that you like the video, thumb it up, hit the bell, subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel, as well as share this video. So we want to, every Black person in America and beyond, in the Caribbean and in Africa and in the UK and in France, and those few stragglers who made it to Japan and China, to get this book. So getting back to the book itself, well, let me go back here first, because I'm seeing a common theme in what you mentioning, and that is the power of organization. And for example, that Prince Hall was able to accomplish a lot of what he accomplished because he understood the importance of organization. And for some reason, there are a lot of us who are against college fraternal organizations, masonry fraternal organizations, and things of this nature, and don't know and understand why these organizations exist, and then why the people are able to move in the way that they're able to move. Right. Because of that. So I want to, based on just your experiences as well as studies, why is this even important? Why do we need such groups? And what are some of the benefits for organizing in such a manner?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So I think that one of the things that separates, and I don't like separating us, but one of the things that separates us as human beings from other sentient beings on the planet is our ability to organize at high levels over space and time, right? And so ants or bees, a lot of insects are very good at organizing. If you ever look at a pride of lions hunting, which is usually the female lions do most of the hunting, they're organized, but they don't have the ability. A lion pride in East Africa can't communicate with a pride of lions in West Africa and say, hey, let's figure out how we're going to get all the buffalo. They don't have that ability. However, human beings do have that capacity through the written word, right? Through passing information across time. I mean, you can get a message from, let's say, if you get up, if your mother tells you, hey, that chicken better be out of the freezer before I get home, you better have that chicken out, right? So we understand that. So the importance of organizations, whether they be fraternal or not, is the ability to set up institutions that can carry out community-based agendas over space and time. They also, I think, give a sense of historical place. The fact that I am what's called a past master of my lodge, meaning a few years back, I was once the worshipful master, or I was the chapter president, if you will. I was the 91st master of my lodge during our 100th year. And so I understood that our first master, Emory B. Smith, who also was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, by the way, I think he was a charter member of the Mu Lambda chapter, if I'm not mistaken. I understood that I came in a line of men of succession back to Emory B. Smith and ultimately back to Prince Hall. And so being a part of this organization, there are certain agendas and things that we have that either are things that are have been set out from the beginning, whether it be a scholarship, feeding the hungry. This weekend we're doing something that a lot of our organizations need to think about doing, in my opinion, which is we're doing a cemetery cleanup at the historic Woodlawn Cemetery here in DC on Saturday. If anyone's local to the area, please feel free to join us. We're doing these things, and we're able to organize over space and time. Now, let's take that back historically. What does that mean, particularly for us as Black folks, when the number one problem facing us is slavery? Yeah. The idea that we control space, we literally have physical space that we're able to control. We have modes of recognition, passwords, et cetera, that we're able to utilize regardless of what the oppressor is doing at that point, to allow us to create and think about our own agenda and then put it into practice. To me, that's the importance of organization when it relates to Prince Hall Freemasonry, the Black Church, or most other Black organizations during this period, pre-Civil War is the ability to communicate across time and space and put our agenda into practice, regardless of what anyone else is doing. Even, I mean, and I tell people this all the time. I mean, I know a lot of folks, we get conscious, we start reading some Dr. Van Sertima, Dr. Clark, and Sam Third, and we leave the Black church. No problem if that's what you want to do. But let's understand something. Black church and white church is two different institutions sociologically and politically. And there's a reason why. And I would argue to some degree that holds true within Freemasonry as well. Yes, you're gonna have the same symbols, the same, you might have the same darn book, but the social and political implications of that are two totally different results because you're dealing with different groups of people. And I think that holds true with Freemasonry. And I tried to communicate that as best I could in the book.
Another thing that like people fail to miss, because is, as you said, and what is common in these types of organizations is that you have all different types of people from various different backgrounds, locations, and things of that nature. But an organization such as Freemasonry, or a college fraternal organization, or an indigenous organization like in the Isheshe tradition of Yoruba, you're initiated into a common value set, and you're also you also have expectations,
yes,
on the types of relationships that you have with members in the organization. And that, what I always say is that, regardless of what your opinion, is on the types of organizations, what it does is provide you, again, with a foundation for relating and for being able to do business or organize politically or whatnot, because you all share the same, if this person has successfully went through the initial test when y'all meet, that this person, understands what the expectations are and the values of this particular organization. So this gives me a foundation to be able to work with this person, although I may not know him, or her, if it's in a different organization personally. It just gives me a trust factor and a foundation to move forward and organize. And I think that is, often missing in these types of discussions, regarding these particular types of organizations. But I want to get back to the book itself. So if you can tell me, like what is a surprising story that is talked about in the text that people may be surprised at, regarding what you've written?
Oh man, well, first of all, I want to acknowledge what you said, which is absolutely, once again, correct. And I also want to acknowledge, since we talked about ancestors, I'm not a member of a Black Greek letter fraternity, but I come from a long line of members of Alpha Phi Alpha. My great grandfather, whose birthday, his 102nd birthday, actually was yesterday. We lost him due to the COVID virus last July. Professor Walsall Smith. He was a Alpha, an Elk, and a Prince Hall from Mason. So he was very into fraternalism. My grandfather actually was I don't know if it's a charter president or if he brought a chapter back. I can't remember, but he was a president of his chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha down in Dothan, Alabama, which he and my great grandfather actually got reactive. I think it was reactivated, or there was a chapter there that had died and they started a new one or something like that. My uncle Jason and my younger brother are Alphas. So you don't know them, right? But if you were to meet them, you would understand y'all have a different, y'all are in a conversation I can't be in at a certain point, right? So we understand that. I wanted to make sure I acknowledge that. Now, to your question, really the book started out with a surprising story. So that's an excellent question. In May of 2014, I was contacted by my co-researcher, Ms. Denisha Swanigan. Ms. Swanigan comes from a very important Black family. She is the great grandniece of Senator Blanche Kelso Bruce. If you're not familiar with B.K. Bruce, he was the first Black person to serve a full term in Congress. He was actually the second in Congress following Hiram Revels. Both of these men, Prince Hall Masons. What happened was that she had a newspaper article from the Cleveland Plain Dealer newspaper from 1869. Actually, it's April 29th, April 30th. It was this week. I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but it was this week. It's the anniversary of what I'm about to tell you. So, got to give Ashe for that. But what happened was that another uncle of hers by the name of Henry C. Bruce had been shot by a mixed race man named Alan Pinks. And Pinks had been arrested. He went to court, was unable to make bail, and the judge remanded him back to his cell. This is in Leavenworth, Kansas. As he's being escorted back to his cell along with the other prisoners, Captain William Matthews and a group of about 12 other brothers ride up on horseback, surround the party, and they gun Alan Pinks down in front of the sheriff in broad daylight in front of everybody in Leavenworth, Kansas in the middle of the day, and they ride off. The newspaper actually says that this shooting was enacted by the colored Masonic fraternity, and that William Matthews, as they refer to him, they call him the highest muckamuck among the Negro Masons of the state. And when I saw that, I was a little familiar with Matthews at the time. He was a very important figure in Black history as far as the Civil War goes. And I knew that he was involved in Prince Hall Freemasonry, but there had been things published about him, but I wasn't familiar with it at the time. But long story short, only thing I really knew about him was in Masonry, we kind of remembered him as a bad guy. And I really wanted to get more specific about what was so bad about him. I also wanted to learn more about this story. And so I took that article to a number of other Masonic historians that I know and asked, I said, hey, has anyone ever heard this story? Does anyone know about this? I just wanted to help Miss Swanigan out from a genealogical perspective, and no one could tell me anything about it, which I found kind of odd. And so we kept investigating, looking at the newspapers and whatnot. And what I started to come to realize was, based upon this story, that the history that had been published about Black Freemasonry in what we would today call the Wild West or the Old West was entirely wrong. And so what she and I decided to do, at first to solve this mystery of her family history, but also to learn more just in general, we decided to sit down and figure out what was the correct story. And that started out as a magazine article, which became a research paper, which ultimately became the book.
Now, I want to kind of go back to the beginning of this conversation when I was reading your bio. There's an individual, and I put you, in this tradition, in this lineage, so to speak. And in 2019, you were the recipient of the Dr. Charles H. Wesley Medal of History.
Yes, sir.
Now, Charles H. Wesley is a very important person because he has written a number of historical texts. He wrote, of course, the History of Alpha Phi Alpha text, but he also did one for Masonry, for Prince Hall Masonry, if I'm not mistaken.
He did three, as a matter of fact. Yeah, he did three. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have two of them.
So I wanted to get your opinion as much as you can of, and inform the audience of Dr. Charles H. Wesley and him as a historian and just what you know.
Sure, no problem. So Dr. Charles H. Wesley, as you said, very important figure as a Black historian. He was formerly a professor at my alma mater, Howard University. He was. I don't know all of his history as Alpha Alpha. I do know he was the general president. I think that's the correct term. Am I right? Of Alpha Alpha. He was an ordained AME minister, and he also was formerly president he worked at Wilberforce and as president of I think Central State universities up in Ohio. Dr. Wesley was as Brother Joseph Walks, who was the founder of our Phylaxis Research Society, referred to him. He was the dean of Black historians in the mid 20th century, having published, as you mentioned, the history of Alpha Alpha. I think he did some work on the history of the Lynx organization. He published a biography of Bishop Richard Allen, as well as the first, I think, worthy text on Prince Hall, the man, known as Prince Hall Life and Legacy. He also wrote the history of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, and then went back into the second edition of that as well. So that's why when you said one, I said three, because he did those. And he was just a very profound individual. He was a member of, Masonically speaking, he was a member of Hiram Lodge number 4 here in Washington, D.C. He was a 33rd degree Mason, very active in the United Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction Prince Hall affiliation. And he was just a profound scholar. And I was so honored to receive that award in his name. Never got to meet him. He passed, I think, a couple years before I was born. My grandfather did. But to have a medal attached to my book and attached to anything connected to me, I consider to be a high honor. Truly remarkable individual, and to be considered a kind of a grandson of his, intellectually speaking, is something that I do not take lightly. And I think, and I will say this too, and we can move on. But I think that whatever your work is, whether it's as a historian, whether it's as a medical doctor or what have you, if you're doing work, and you're doing work particularly for African people, we always need to be mindful of who are your ancestors, not just biologically, but also intellectually and spiritually. Because I'll tell people all day and night, I never met Dr. John Henrik Clarke in person, but I do consider him to be like a grandfather to me, because I was taught by people who were taught by Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Same thing with with other greats like Dr. Ben, Dr. Van Serma. I never got to meet any of those ones that I just spoke on in person, but I'm a student of many people who were students directly of them. And so and I also, let me say this too, since I have the biological connection, I am related to Dr. Naeem Akbar, who I do consider, he and my grandmother were second cousins, but he and I know each other personally, and so that's a biological connection. But then there's also an intellectual one. And so whatever tradition that you're coming out of, I think it's very important that we acknowledge that. So that's the first time I've ever been asked that question. So thank you for asking it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And speaking of genealogy, I've had a few genealogists on the show before, and I would like for you to speak on that. And you kind of have already, but you mentioned, I forgot the sister's name, who that project, helped to spawn the book.
Denisha Swanigan.
Yes. That you were working on an actual genealogical project with her.
Yes.
And so, I know a lot of people are looking to get DNA tests so they can see, the general area from which their most direct ancestors come from. Yes. But why is it important to go to do our own genealogical research within our own family, immediate, as far back as we can go, and how does one even begin that process?
Sure. That is a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. So the reason why you should be doing your own family history, not DNA is important. We can talk about DNA, but the reason why you should be doing your own family history is simply because it's the story of you. And James R. Morgan III is not Asar Imhotep. Asar Imhotep is not James R. Morgan III, even if we're cousins. Even if we're cousins. And guess what? Even if we were brothers, biologically speaking, heck, your story is not going to be the same as mine, right? And I mean, your family history will be the same as mine, but at a certain point, there's going to be a divergence. Your descendants will trace back to you, my descendants back to me. And then they'll come together and say, oh, we're family because we both trace back to that set of brothers, right? Now, let's say you and I share a mother and not the same father. That means we have half of a story that is the same, but then your father's story is different than my father's story. And that informs who we are. So doing that work is very important, I think. And I got to a point, and I want to give a major shout out to one of my other academic mentors, Dr. Charles Johnson, formerly of Howard University, now teaches at North Carolina Central. He gives an assignment in one of his classes. I can't remember which one it was now, but one of his classes, he gives an assignment every year to his students that they are supposed to do a general family history of themselves and talk about and do a presentation on how a movement in history affected your family or an individual in your family, such as the Great Depression, World War One, the Civil War, whatever, right? But his point is to try to get you researching and thinking about your own family in a historical context. For myself, at the time, I was not a noted genealogist. I didn't have all these accolades and things. I didn't have a book. I was just, a 20, 21-year-old college student. And I knew a little bit about my family history. I was fortunate in that I have met 3 great grandmothers and 1 great grandfather who, as I mentioned earlier, just passed in July of last year. But to me, my family history wasn't that important. To me, I was like, I come from regular black folk from Alabama, North Carolina, Virginia. Who cares about my family, right? But there was this story that I had learned from my grandfather, from my mom's side, my mother's father, about my great 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 grandfather, whose name was Reverend W.J. Hightower. I would later find out his full name was William Jefferson Hightower. Reverend Hightower was a minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and in the early 1900s, he was assigned to the city of Dothan, and he decided that he wanted to build a new erect a new building for the congregation that he was pastoring. At the time, the church was called Gaines Chapel AME Church. He raised money from the community and then decided to go to the local brick factory, which was only one in the area at that time. And the man who owned it refused to sell him a single brick because he was black. And so what Reverend Hightower did was he organized the community and said, listen, I've got money, but we need bricks. I need everybody. Call Pookie, Ray, Earl, and them. Get bricks by any means necessary. We're going to get bricks or die trying, however he worded it. And the community came together, and even the children. There were still, I don't know about, there's none alive today, but there were still, when I was a child, still elders alive who could tell you that when they were kids, their parents told them, on your way to school, you find a brick. On your way home, you find a brick. We're not going to ask where you got it from. So they got them from abandoned buildings, work sites, wherever they could get them from. And they got enough bricks together so that Reverend Hightower could build. He then took that money and paid the men who worked, and as well as paid the sisters who brought, refreshments and whatnot, so that they could erect this building. That he renamed the church Cherry Street AME Church. That church today is considered the mother of the AME denomination in the state of Alabama. It is a historical landmark. And at 6 years old, that was the first time I saw the church in person. My grandfather stood me in front of this cornerstone, pointed to it and said, your ancestor built that. At 6, that had an impact on me, but not as much as it did at 21, because I sat back and said, wait a minute, this is important. My ancestor came out of a tradition, and we've already talked about the AME Church a little bit with Bishop Richard Allen, right? I mentioned Bishop Turner, Bishop Turner's on my mind all the time because for those who aren't familiar with Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, he's a founding father of Pan-Africanism, Black nationalism. If you love Garvey, you're gonna love Bishop Turner. If you love Malcolm, you're gonna love Bishop Turner if you're not familiar with him already. Turns out, matter of fact, and let me give a quote just so you can understand how deep Bishop Turner was. And again, I want to encourage everyone to check out the Bishop Henry McNeil Turner Project. Hopefully we can talk about that a little bit too. But Bishop Turner, one of the quotes that he said that I just love, very short and sweet. He said, hell is an improvement on America where the Negro is concerned. Bishop
Yeah.
Turner, as Dr. Clark teaches us, Bishop Turner, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be long-winded, but Bishop Turner was so deep. As Dr. Clark teaches, Bishop Turner he would stand the American flag up in a pulpit, and for about 15 minutes, instruct our people how it was a GD rag, and chastise it and put it on trial for all the horrors that had been committed against African people in this country. Now, mind you, this man once fought for that flag as a Civil War veteran. He chastised the flag, put it on trial, found it guilty, and then would wipe himself down, drink some water, and then preach a sermon. Bishop Turner was also a mentor of my direct ancestor. He personally ordained my direct ancestor into the AME clergy. So the importance of understanding our own family history, is it any surprise once you know, for me, once I know that, well, dang, if my ancestor was rolling like that, my ancestor was donating money to Bishop Turner's by the way, more people went back to Africa under Bishop Turner than under Marcus Garvey. My ancestor didn't go back to Africa, but he was donating money to it. So what does that tell me about the politics of my own ancestor, and what direction that I should be going in? Genealogy provides you with a guidepost, which is why most civilizations, they venerate their ancestors. We're not, as Africans, we're not unique in doing that. It's just that our tradition has been attacked, in some places broken or dismembered. So we have to literally remember, putting back together that which was lost, for those who understand, that which was attacked. And so to me, that's the importance of doing our family histories. DNA is an important aspect as well, but know the narrative, know the story of your ancestors. And at a point, I'll say this and I'll be quiet. I got to a point, because of Dr. Johnson and because of this assignment, that it started to bother me that I could tell you about the dynasties of ancient Kemet. I could talk to you about some of the great Africans of medieval history, or abolitionists like David Walker and Frederick Douglass and all these people. But I couldn't, when I was in my early 20s, I couldn't tell you who my great grandmama was. I couldn't tell you. I had never seen with my own eyes, even though I had been to Egypt, right? I've sat literally seen the pharaohs, or their remains. But I had never laid eyes upon ancestors of mine who had been enslaved in this country, and there were photos of them that whole time. I was able to find that. So learning your history, to me, that's a microcosm of the work that we have to do as a macrocosm, as a people, of literally remembering our own greatness.
Yes, and people don't understand that most religious and spiritual traditions emerge simply from recalling the stories of one's ancestors, like the lived traditions of great ancestors become like the frameworks for spiritual traditions all around the world, and especially Africa, especially in the sense that it lets you know the possibilities. And for some reason, when we connect more, when we can relate to the people in history, because you look at them and say, well, if they can do that at that time with that amount of resources, then I should be able to take it a step further. And you would always see that in the ancient Egyptian tradition. So, for example, you could probably barely see it in the back, but I have a book called Aluja. And it's a Chuluba Bantu word that means to retrace one's steps, to restore that which had been broken.
Right.
And there's a cognate for it in the ancient Egyptian language that is called rouge, and it has a causative S prefix, saruj. It's part of a phrase, saruj ta, restoring the world. And it has the same meanings that you would find with Aluja in its various different things. But it's important because it's a phrase that the pharaohs and other people use throughout um, their declarations of virtues and innocence, and they're giving their their biographies of whatnot about their life, and they're
Right.
always talk about the community in which they come from, the line in which they come from, and then their ability to surpass what their ancestors did.
Right.
Now, in order for them to even make that claim, they would have to know, one, who their ancestors are,
Mm-hmm.
and then two, what they've done.
Yes, sir.
To even be encouraged to, okay, let me see how I can step it up a notch,
Yes,
you
sir.
know. And so I think that is a very important component of, learning your direct. We know the greats,
Right.
MLKs, the Nat Turners, the
Yes.
um, individuals like that. Now they may be related to you,
Mm-hmm.
physically, but Grandma Rose,
Mm-hmm.
and Grandpa James,
Right.
like they've done some things that may not necessarily have made it in the history books,
Mm-hmm.
but could if you write your own
Right.
history book,
That's the point. Yes, sir.
and
Yes, sir.
so
Mm-hmm.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. You're absolutely correct. I mean, the we that's part of our part of our I don't say problem. Part of our obligation is to put Grandma Rose in the history books. That's part of
Mm-hmm,
what we're supposed to be doing in my view now is to put some of these stories of our own people in these books. I mean, for me, my ancestor is a person who kind of paved the way for a Dr. King or a Malcolm X. He may not have been world famous or anything of that nature, but he comes out of that tradition of, in that case, the black pastors or what have you. By the way, funny enough, and I had no idea about this when I joined, Reverend Hightower was a Prince Hall Mason. Isn't
mm-hmm,
that interesting? Oh, a lot of the other ministers and community leaders who helped him in the black community were also members of the Masonic Lodge, of the two lodges that existed in the city at that time.
mm-hmm,
Isn't that interesting? Go to another side of my family. I have a 4 times great grandfather, Joseph McBride, who was born enslaved,
mm-hmm,
becomes a landowner, has a 160-acre farm, community leader, founding member of his Masonic Lodge. Isn't that interesting? So
mm-hmm,
here we are in 2021. James Morgan got all these awards, wrote a book about the lodge and this and that and the third. And I'm coming from a biological tradition of great men who happen to be Prince Hall Masons. One of them, Alabama has a history of their Eastern Stars that there was like a commemorative book that they did. A friend of mine gave me a copy. My 4 times great grandfather and my 4 times great grandmother, I had no idea they started an Eastern Star chapter that still exists over 100 years later.
mm-hmm.
So the question becomes, was I truly doing something which I thought I was being unique when I thought I was being cool when I became a Mason? I'm like, oh man, none of my friends is into this. Let me, I'm being, I'm in college, I'm doing this. But even by accident, I'm following in an ancestral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we think we're doing something special because we're talented at music or because we know how to cook well, this, that, third. But when you go back and do the history of your own family, you'll say, wait a minute, this goes back into what we said earlier, life in cycles. We understand that newborns are ancestors returning. That's a part of our culture. That's a part of our cultural tradition that some would have us to separate from. But in reality, I believe that it's our culture that has ultimately been our salvation ever since we've been going through what we call the Ma'afa.
Exactly. And I wanted to mention this earlier. I forgot what book discusses this, but I think, or at least this is one of many that discusses it, is
Mhm.
Africanisms in American Culture, edited by Joseph E. Holloway.
Yep, I got a copy on one of these shelves over here. Yes, sir.
And I think in that text, it talks about, for example, I've forgotten whose chapter it is, the secret societies of West Africa that came here and were transformed into other types of societies, like insurance companies
Hmm.
and like burial societies and things of that nature. And so like people have to understand, like, these organizations, the way that we have adopted them, they're still traditional African organizations, but transformed for survival, in this particular environment and setting, which is why, like with the comment that you made earlier, the Black church is different than the white church in terms of structure, setting, ideology, et cetera, et cetera. We could say the same thing about the Black Greek lettered organizations.
Mm-hmm.
We don't operate and do the same. We may have the same letters in terms of the Greek alphabet, that are used as acronyms in each organization. But, how it is structured in terms of, the initiation processes, the lifetime membership, all of this is still based on the African template,
Yes.
from the ancestors in which came. So, like, knowing your ancestral lineage will link you, even still, if they were part of these organizations, directly, from an to an African society or whatnot, because they just emerge and transform into these various different societies we see here, including, the various churches. But you mentioned the just wrote it down briefly, the Turner Project, and that you wanted to go into that. So if you can, let us know
Sure.
what that is and what you want to go.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for that. So I want to give a shout out to one of my other academic mentors, Dr. Andre Johnson, down at the University of Memphis. He is the founder of the Bishop Henry McNeil Turner Project. The website at URL is the Henry McNeil Turner Project.org. And it is a website that I serve on the advisory board for. It is a one-stop shop for anything you want to learn about Bishop Turner's life, scholarship on him, his speeches, or what have you. Bishop Turner was a very active and important Prince Hall Mason that related back to the book and the subject of today. He actually was the father of John of Grand Master John P. Turner, who served as Grand Master here in Washington, D.C. back in about 1920. And so that site is a place that I really want to, let folks know about as well, because Bishop Turner was, to me, and I actually wrote a research paper about his Masonic life in 2018, which I published. Bishop Turner was, again, I mean, he was he went through so many phases of his life, as far as first starting out having faith in America. Then he decided that, you know what, maybe it's best that we either get our own land in what is today the United States, or go back to Africa. And by the time he lived so long that by the time he was in his latter years, he basically was like, to hell with all of this entire European settler colony project, and was very vocal about it. He was had a national profile similar to Frederick Douglass. He actually was old enough to be the father. He was old enough because he was born in 1834. He was old enough to have been a father of both Booker T. Washington and Du Bois, and he actually engaged in debates with them when they were at their height of scholarship, about what direction we should go in as a people. And he really was, up until Garvey, was one of the last members of Black public life to really advocate for going back to Africa before Garvey came on the scene. He was the last one, he was kind of the last of the Mohicans from the 19th century who was on that train. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that, because Bishop Turner doesn't always necessarily get the credit that he deserves. But he's, again, I consider myself somewhat in an intellectual line from him, because of that relationship he had with my ancestor. My ancestor having been ordained by him. I mean, that was something. I mean, again, if you know where you've come from, then you have a better understanding of where you're going. I literally walked past a picture of Bishop Turner every day almost when I was at Howard. I knew his name, didn't know much else about him, but had no idea, had it not been for choices that he made in the life of my ancestor and where he would be assigned. And as a minister, my ancestor might not have met his wife, and I might not be here. So that's an important aspect of history too, or genealogy too, is understanding how if
Connection.
certain connections, if certain things didn't happen, you might not be here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it really underscores the um importance of making those connections, because like as the ancient Egyptian phrase states, every moment or act that you do, contributes to eternity, into the future. Like it's these little webs. It could have been, the someone could have been, lost their wallet, and then somebody important gave them some money to get on the bus, but it was that, you know, act that got them on the bus to get a job interview, and at work they met their, who was to be their future wife, and then they gave birth to, saying so and so who did this in history. It's like these little things that if they weren't, you know, happening in the way that they were at that moment, certain events, wouldn't happen in history.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm seeing in the comments, like his brother says, they are African letters, not Greek. And this is something that I stress all the time. And I just wanted to briefly, as I made this little thing here. So you see the Greek letters Alpha Phi Alpha, but they come from ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. And so there's several texts that you can find that deal with the evolution of our modern so-called Latin alphabet, which came from the Greek, and the Greek came from the Phoenician, and the Phoenician came from the Egyptian. And where these things come from. But again, this is just part of the historical narrative, that if you don't understand the history of things, you won't see how they're related to and evolve today. So that's what I'm saying. Like, people may see something in a particular package, and don't understand the spirit and the value behind the package, behind the signs or whatnot. And I think that this is also a reason why a lot of us are challenged in mathematics, because they don't understand that a sign is a sign. It's just like in the Matrix movie, when the Indian guy in Matrix 2, Neo discovered that he was a program, and Neo was looking like, a program, talking about love. And, the Indian guy was like, love is just a word. What matters is the connection in which it implies, and it goes to underline, like, don't get caught up in symbols. It's always the meaning behind. It's just a carrier, vehicle, meaning. And so when you see these organizations that African Americans have created, there's an underlying spirit there that is ancestral. And it may come in different forms that you're not familiar with, but if you understand meaning, saying in purpose and the tradition and things, then you will see the Africanness in it. Some more directly, like the African Lodge, one and things of this nature. But just kind of want to wrap up here.
Sure.
And so I've been appreciating this discussion very greatly. And so I just want to reiterate, y'all been seeing me show his website address, but I'm going to kind of verbally highlight it here. It's jamesrmorgan.com. And there you can read more about him, and you can also purchase the book. Matter of fact, let me just share my screen real quick. And there we go. So y'all can see for yourself. I'm I'm on the About Us page, what it looks like, so you know you're on the right. James Morgan. I don't know if there's another James R. Morgan and website, but just in case there is, you know what this one looks like. So he has a number of videos, and you have your own YouTube channel too, right?
Yes, sir. So I work with the Prince Hall think tank, as you see
Uh-huh.
there, which is a monthly YouTube show where we discuss Prince Hall Masonic history and general education for our members and for the general public, as well as Black Pro Gen Live, which is a monthly YouTube show where we discuss Black genealogy. So I don't stay still for too long.
Indeed. Yes. So I want y'all to get a copy of this text here. The Lost Empire, Black Freemasonry in the Old West, 1867 to 1906. There is a foreword by Alton G. Roundtree and an introduction by Denasia Swanigan, who we mentioned earlier. So can you tell us a little bit about Alton G. Roundtree?
Oh, sure.
Who did your foreword?
Sure, no problem. He's a personal friend and mentor of mine. He's a member of one of our lodges here in DC. When you talk about kind of I hate to use this phrase, but like the Mount Rushmore, or maybe I shouldn't say Mount Rushmore. Maybe I should say Abu Simbel or something like that of Masonic scholars. You have to look at Martin Delaney. Well, first you start off with Prince Hall, Martin Delaney, Dr. Charles H. Wesley, Harry A. Williamson, Joseph Walks, but all of them have passed on to ancestorhood. Brother Roundtree is still living, and he is the most published Black Masonic scholar alive. In terms of books and articles, he's the editor of our Phylaxis Research Journal, and he helped. He mentored me in the publishing of this book, and so I wanted to make sure that I had his blessing and some words from him about it. Very profound scholar in his own right, and one of the joys, because I wrote almost everything else in the book except for their parts. I was really overjoyed personally by reading what Miss Swanigan had to say in her introduction about how we met and our friendship and whatnot. She's kind of adopted me as a son. She's old. She's a young woman, but she could be my mother. I'll say it like that. but professionally, as a Mason and as a scholar, to have Brother Roundtree to write my foreword for my first book, I mean, that was a dream come true. To have him, kind of give me some kudos. So definitely, I recommend checking out his works. He just published a biography of Joseph A. Walks. His works are all available on Amazon.com. If you look up just Alton G. Roundtree, he has about 7 or 8 books out that you can check out on our history. So I definitely recommend all of them.
Indeed. Well, again, I appreciate you coming through. Do you have any last words? Something that we didn't touch on that you wanted to mention and highlight?
The only thing I would say again to you, my brother, is great job. I really enjoyed this discussion. I hope we can do it again, personally and online. I remember meeting you a few years back at, I think it was an ASCAT conference at the Howard, and I was very impressed with your work and continue to be. I think that one of the things that this internet culture has done, unfortunately, is it creates a situation where people feel that they always have to agree with somebody. And if you don't agree with that person or you're not with that camp, then y'all can't be friends. Y'all can't talk. You and I, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I appreciate brothers like yourself creating platforms where we can discuss ideas, whether we agree with them or not. The fact that we're coming together as a people discussing, and then when the discussion is over, putting those thoughts and words into practice. Everything I'm saying has little bearing if it's not impactful on your lives. And so my hope is that, I'm not a person out here trying to recruit people to become Masons or what have you, unless that's what you want to do. My hope is that if you decide to buy a copy of the book, which I do want you to do, but if you buy a copy of the book, is that you're more knowledgeable about this subject and not just about Masonry, but also about our people's place in what we call American expansion, the Wild West. A lot of times people today will talk about Bass Reeves as being, the inspiration for the Lone Ranger. Whether or not that's true, we can talk about. But the fact is that Black folks helped make what we call the Old West or the Wild West. Um, I would say this. Here's kind of a African Snapple fact for you as we go.
Mhm.
There's no such thing as a white cowboy. White men who worked in the ranching field at that time were known as cow hands and got paid more than the black cowboys. But because of that, there were more black cowboys on the western frontier because you could pay them less. And that's one of the reasons why today it's the Dallas Cowboys, not the Dallas Cow Hands, because that's how many black men were out there driving those cattle as America was moving westward. And so that's kind of a tidbit that we gotta give our ancestors credit wherever it's due because they were cheated out of it, many of them so long. So understand that cowboys, that's referring to us. Anytime
um,
you see the word referring to black folks.
I heard that there was a relationship between cowboys and the herding tradition of the Fulani,
Yes.
many of whom, saying were captured and brought here.
Yes,
To
sir.
your knowledge, is that, true?
Yes, sir. It is absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct. And again, going back and reclaiming that which belongs to us any darn way is very important. And so that was one of the things, it's kind of funny. I always kind of joke on myself, I'm from New Jersey. I live in the DC metro area and I wrote a book about the Old West, but it's all African. It's all black folks. At the end of the day, that's what I love. I love talking about us. I love studying and researching us because ultimately I think that in studying ourselves, we'll begin to remember the fact that it's not that we're weak, it's that we're too powerful. It's that we're too strong as a people. So we have to tap into that strength, which is innate to us ancestrally. And when we do that, then we will be able to overcome the challenges that we're facing today as a people.
Indeed. And I'll end on this question. What is some of the biggest lessons in terms of purpose and methodology
Hmm.
that you learned from Dr. Greg Carr?
Hmm.
You mentioned him earlier,
Yes.
but many people may know him from the Saturday, what's her name? I forgot her name.
Karen Hunter.
Karen Hunter show on
Uh-huh.
on YouTube, um, and some other things. But he's a very big figure, in Africana studies, and a very profound teacher. I've known a number of people who were taught by him. But and he's always speaking about genealogy. He can't do
Yes.
a lecture without mentioning the genealogy being taught, mouth to ear,
Yes.
between teacher to student and whatnot. So like, in terms of purpose and methodology, what are some of the biggest lessons that you learned from him? And that'll be my last question.
Sure. Oh man, I mean, what can't I say about Dr. Carr? In terms of purpose, I would say the thing that I learned from him would be the understanding one's own personal life purpose. He often talks about, Dr. Carr, if you know his academic background, he actually has a law degree. He started going to school for theater as an undergrad, actually. And then he got a law degree, and then he decided he wanted to be a classroom teacher, mainly largely influenced by Dr. Clark and his impact on Dr. Carr's life. So I think understanding one's own personal purpose and being willing to accept whatever your calling is, whether it be your vocation as a parent, as a teacher, as a student, right? And that's something that, I'm 31 years old and there's still callings on my life as a special someone in my life likes to tell me, she always says, hey, James, you have multiple callings I see, and some of them you're doing, some of them you're not doing. You need to get to that though. And because your spirit won't rest until you accomplish that. So being comfortable in that, because we're not in this society, I don't think that we're taught oftentimes, at least not by the dominant society, we're not comfortable all the time in being in accepting our purpose. Real quickly, I know this story from Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, where he talked about how he had this college roommate who he asked him, he said, well, what are you going to be? What do you want to major in? And he said, oh, I think I'm going to go into astrophysics. And his roommate said, the black community can't afford to lose an intellectual like you to such a frivolous topic. Maybe you should go into like civil rights law. Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of the most profound brothers when it comes to astrophysics. I mean, I have a couple of his books myself, and he's and his presence has opened up a field for our children to like, wow, we got a black man, not Imhotep, not Banneker, not someone from way back when. We got a brother on TV that's up there talking about space and our place in it, right? But he had to be comfortable in his life's purpose. So I would say that that's the lesson I learned from Dr. Carr, and I'm continuing to learn. I'll say that as well. As far as methodology goes, I think one of the biggest lessons I learned from Dr. Carr is being able to accept in an academic way things about Black people or ways to study our people that aren't considered quote unquote traditional. So when we talk about, one of the things that I love, I mean, I hate it, but part of me loves it, is when I hear people talk about Black history as being primarily oral history. And the reason why I hate it is because it kind of diminishes, it diminishes the importance of oral history. Two, it relegates our history to just being oral, as though there's no documentation of things. I mean, having been to Kemet, I can tell you that Black folk like to write a lot. We write on every darn thing, including the ceiling. Yeah. And that's not just the only example. We understand the manuscripts that exist coming down from Timbuktu. We understand Black people, we've been writing, we talk, yes. But that sometimes is because the written word can't contain what we're trying to communicate. Yeah. Right. So-called Western academia might not accept all of our sources, or might say, well, how do you really know? We don't have the recording, or we don't have. Well, yeah, my grandmama told me. Yeah, but how do you really know? There's a different. We need different methodologies than that which our oppressors use in order for us to get free. We're going to need some different information, and we continue to need that. There's a reason why the largest Vodun ceremony in the Western Hemisphere happened before what event? The Haitian Revolution. Yeah. Now, you may or may not believe in that particular religious tradition, but I'll tell you one thing: those brothers and sisters, they believed it that night and believed it that next morning, and they got free. Exactly. So methodology is very important in understanding that, using alternate sources that may or may not be in somebody. I mean, I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I used the methods that I learned in school, obviously, to put the book together, but I also had to learn how to translate information or history that may not be in published academic journals, because I'm a Mason. I had access to different things. So I used those methods, I used those sources to put together a book and a package in a way that could be acceptable to academia, right? But also still communicate the humanity of our people. And that in a nutshell, that would be how I answer that question. Personal purpose and being willing to accept alternate forms of sources and methods as an academic.
Well, I appreciate you greatly again for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom. And again, his website is jamesrmorgan.com. And I should have put any other social media if you share your social media.
Well, yeah, no, don't worry about it at this point. But jamesrmorgan.com, if you hit the contact me, if you want to reach out to me you have a question, or you want to get an autographed copy or something, it goes right to my phone or to my email, and I respond to everything. So, or you can find me on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter and all that stuff. So if you want to reach out to me directly, I respond usually pretty immediately most of the time. So I'm around.
Indeed. So we appreciate you greatly, and yes, we got to bring you back so we can discuss some more things in the past and the present, and I'll be back on the East Coast because I live in Philly, but I'm in Texas right now for basically another year, and so I'll be closer then, and definitely can hang out.
Yes, sir.
So yeah, again, I want to share I'm on all the social media. So if y'all want to contact me, y'all find me there. Y'all know how to get in contact with me. But yeah, make sure that y'all visit jamesrmorgan.com. Y'all get a copy of the book, and then we'll all come back and discuss the book and see what we learned, on it. So thank you 1,000 times. I appreciate you coming through, and I want to thank those of you who are listening live on YouTube, on both the Facebook pages, and those of you who will be catching the archives. So make sure that you like the video and continue to share the video with friends, family, and colleagues. And let's get this message spread. So y'all enjoy the rest of y'all day. I got some studying to do, then I got to go to work. And until next time, which will probably be next Friday. So peace and blessings to you all, and we'll talk soon. Peace.